know on here, or to note on here, that there are a lot of different organizations involved as well. There are a number of a number of NASA locations, for example, Goddard and JPL, but there's also a Kansas University, University of Alaska Fairbanks, University of Texas. There's a lot of organizations that are involved in pulling together the instruments and deciding what flies. Now this is what a typical plane looks like. This is one of the IceBridge planes. It's a P-3 aircraft that's used fairly often. And you get some idea of how the instruments are spread around on the plane. This will be based on what the field of view is needed and some of the other logistics associated with those instruments. But they put them pretty much everywhere they can on the planes to make sure that there's plenty of coverage. If you look at like MCORs, you see there's one on each wing, and that gives you some separation between them as well. So relative to the missions themselves, the IceBridge science team gets together twice a year to decide what the upcoming campaign should look like and where the flights should go. Displayed here now are the flights color-coded by year of the campaigns that have been focused on the northern hemisphere. You'll see that there's been a lot of focus on Greenland, of course, because that is where the biggest ice sheets are, but also on the glaciers of Alaska. And so there's different missions focused on different areas. The flights for Antarctica, as you can see from this slide, are heavily, or have been in the past anyway, heavily influenced by the transit time to get over from South America, and that has limited to some extent the range of the aircraft. I would like to say that the mission has attained an 130 that's able to fly in and out of McMurdo. And so beginning in this year, there'll be dramatically changed flight lines and paths that we can take simply because we have the logistics of McMurdo to back up a big C-130. I had mentioned that the IceBridge project was primarily to be a bridge between two different satellite missions, but there's also advantages in and of itself being airborne, and this slide begins to delve into that a little bit. You'll see over on the left, these are the overflights of the ISAT-1 satellite flying over the Jakobshavn IceBridge glacier in Greenland. This is one of the fastest and most dynamic glaciers on the planet, and certainly one of the biggest ones in Greenland. And you can see that there's gaps and there's some resolution issues associated with the IceSat overflights. Whereas with IceBridge, we were able to concentrate on that particular area in quite a bit more detail and fly finer grids and gather quite a bit more data there. So it's actually, in some cases, better than a satellite mission. The disadvantage, of course, is the satellite continues to stay up there and gathering data, whereas the campaigns for IceBridge are limited in duration. This gives you some sense of the types of data that we're trying to gather. We put together a suite of instruments that can focus on things like where is the sea ice, where is the ice surface elevation relative to the bedrock, and those sorts of things, including how much float there is with the glaciers as they're calving and those sorts of things. Now, I'm going to give you a little bit more detail now. For those of you that are not familiar with IceBridge data, this will be this may be a little bit of a strain, but I wanted to give you some sense of the breadth of data that's available for Operations IceBridge itself. So these next two reports are going to show the instruments that are flying and then some of the data for the various areas that are available. I'll point out a couple of things for those of you that are not familiar with the way instruments typically work. Let's pick ATM data. They come in and gather the information itself, the raw data off of the instruments, but then over time they work on developing new products coming off of those instruments. And in NASA parlance, those are different levels of data. And so you'll notice with, well, let's say with DMS, there's level 0 data, And level 0 data is just the raw instrument data. That's the baseline data that's coming off of those particular instruments. The level 1B data has been processed a little bit such that there is geolocation information and a little bit of quality assurance going into processing of the data, but primarily it's that the data is geo-referenced, so you know not just what the instruments were seeing, but exactly where they were seeing it. Then level 2 data, say like on the ATM, has some derived geophysical variables. That's where you're beginning to try to piece apart what is actually being shown in the data. And then the level 3 data has been gridded, which means that you can interchange and use the data with other instruments and other readings, so you can do a lot, it's a lot easier to combine the data. I will say for completeness, there's also a level 4, but that is for model data, for predictive models and those sorts of things, which Operation IceBridge is not taking part in. I'm sorry, and so again, another set of slides showing some of the other instruments that are available. We'll go into what some of these actually mean, but there's a lot of LIDAR and radar, altimetry data. There's quite a mix of instruments out. And this last slide in particular shows the instruments that are used for looking at the Alaskan glaciers. This is primarily being run through the University of Alaska Fairbanks, and so these particular instruments are focused specifically on the glaciers in Alaska. Some metrics associated with IceBridge, and this is ramping up pretty dramatically, but thus far users have downloaded roughly just over 100 terabytes of IceBridge data since we went live in 2010. This number is growing pretty rapidly each year, so each year it's significantly more data that's downloaded. We do get requests for data from all over the world. Over 100 countries are represented in terms of using the data, and we get about 50 requests a month from various organizations asking for the holdings that we have. Now, having said that, hopefully that gives you a little bit of background on the goals of the mission and what some of the data holdings are. What we'll do now is we'll go to the portal, which is the primary public access and the primary means used to get to the data. And it'll take just a second to bring this up. All right, I'm no longer able to see what the Adobe Connect looks like, but I'm hoping at this point that you can see the portal window.
Steve, can you fill the screen to make it bigger?
Well, for those of you actually in the gray menu bar at the top of the right above his presentation, you have a request control full screen, or you might not see the request control, and you have two icons that look like screens. Those allow you to zoom in.
No, I see that, but
so that's on the end of the participant.
Steve can expand his window on his laptop to make it bigger. There you go.
Is that what you wanted, Steve?
Yes.
Okay. All right.
Looks great. Thank you.
All right. I was worried about doing that because I didn't know exactly how that would be sized to the Adobe system. Okay, well, as long as that's working. So this is the initial default view for the portal, and you'll see that the information provided is primarily focused on the flight lines, and I'm hoping you can see my mouse here. So all of these red lines are the flight lines of the various missions, and you can switch between different hemispheres. Right now, we're looking at the northern hemisphere. And we'll talk today primarily about how to narrow down this list of flight lines to focus more on what you in particular are interested in. I will say the first thing that I do when I come into the portal is try to maximize the amount of real estate I have. Like Steve Bailey was saying, to maximize the window. But also we have a maximize button here that gets rid of some of the header and footer details that are out there, just to give us a little bit more real estate. So the first thing I want to show you how to do is basic navigation on the screen. So the first thing you'd want to do is work with the pan and zoom capability shown here. And it works pretty much like you would expect. If you mouse down and pull the mouse around, you're able to pan around the area. You also have a zoom slider here that'll allow you to zoom in on an area or zoom out. And one thing I want to note is as we're moving around, you'll notice that over on the left, there's a tree that is being regenerated each time we move. This tree represents the flight lines that are visible in the geographic area that we're looking in. And that's one way that you can limit the number of flight lines that you're looking at and dealing with. So each time you move here, the window provides a spatial filtering of the flight lines that we're looking at. Now there's an additional way to zoom in, and that is instead of using just the slider, you can also shift click with your mouse and draw a window over the particular area you're interested in. And that, if you know the area that you want to find, if there's a particular glacier that you're trying to look at, that's probably the speediest way to get there.
If you click on the list on the left, will that highlight one of the flight lines?
Yes, I'm glad you asked that question.
By the way, this is Michael Goodman.
Oh, okay, Michael, yes. Yeah, we'll show that in a minute. I do want to show if you get lost, if you kind of get out in the middle of nowhere and you're not sure where you are, you can always hit reset and go back, so you can't get too lost up here. But as Michael was asking, if you want to look at particular flight lines, there's two ways to do that. One is to use the select tool and just click on them, and you'll see that they'll be highlighted in yellow when you do that. At the same time, you'll notice that over in the tree structure, the same flight will be highlighted in yellow over here as well. And you can also select from this list here. And so you can pick it either way. Now you'll also notice that a data details window came up associated with that particular flight line. And in a minute, we'll get into how to use that and what that means. So we talked about filtering the flight lines via the window, via the spatial area that you're interested in. We also have a series of, well, right now we have two filters that allow additional filtering of those flights. The first is a temporal filter where you can set the dates, and that gives you a date range. The default is the entire Operation IceBridge span lifetime for every campaign, just so that every flight will be listed out there. If there are particular years that you're interested in, you can click on the filter and change the year that, or change the date range that you're interested in. We're working on changing this to a slider instead of a set of calendars, but right now it is selected via these calendar buttons. The other thing that you can do, if you know the types of instruments that you're interested in, you can simply ask for the flights that contain those particular instruments. And so through these mechanisms, you have basically three different filtering mechanisms: the geospatial filter, the temporal filter, and then the selection of instruments. And through that, you can narrow down the flights that are most important to you. I will say that the filters, we're still trying to decide exactly how to do this, but currently, when you select a list of instruments, these instruments are ORed together, so it's any flight that has any of these instruments on it, as opposed to an AND, which means it has to have both of those instruments on And we talked a little bit already about selecting the flight lines. You can do that, again, two ways. One is just selecting them directly, and the other is selecting them from the list that's over on the left. When you do that, you do get a data details window. And this window provides you with some information about what the plane was used, even the tail number of the plane, when the takeoff and landing took place. So if you need to narrow down on a specific day or a specific event, this will tell you that. And it also gives you a list of the instruments that were flown on that particular flight. Now, very important with that, there's also the flight reports that are listed. And Jennifer's going to, and if you click on that, this will open up either a PDF or a text version of the flight reports. And there's a lot of really useful information in there. And I think Jennifer's going to bring up an example of that here in just a moment. What I'm going to do is I'm going to stop sharing, and she's going to be able to bring that up.
Okay, I will now mute the conference. We'll take all questions at the end. Okay, Steve, so you'll unmute yourself.
The conference is now in silent mode.
Okay, so can I'm assuming that I am unmuted at this point. So this is an example of one of the flight reports. It was just one that we picked up at random. But you'll see in here, there's a lot of useful information. Well, as we scroll down through this, you'll see this. There'll be the flight numbers, and again, the same type of information you saw in the details, including the takeoff time and the landing time, but also the major accomplishments that were focused on and were done during that particular flight. Geographic keywords in terms of what areas were focused on and where did the mission fly, why was that flown, and you can generally look here and tell why that particular flight was made. There's also a good list of what instruments were working and when were they working during the flight. And then this is always pretty interesting to me. It'll be a mission report in text form from the mission scientist that was on board the plane at the time. And they will often go into a lot of detail about things that went right, things that went wrong. Was there bad weather? Did they decide to make a change at the last minute in terms of what they were doing? And so there's a lot of good information in here about what happened during that particular flight. And then the individual instrument reports will come in as well. So even though one instrument might have worked well, one of the other ones might have had trouble, and so you can get some background information in this flight report from that. There'll also be a few other images in here. One of the things that Michael Studinger, the chief scientist and manager for the effort, likes to do is to kind of put in his own version of the track that was flown. And often they'll also have like weather data. Here's the satellite data over Greenland at the time that the flight was taken, that sort of thing. So there's a lot of good background information that are not the instrument data itself, but give you some background about whether this flight and the instrument on it is going to give you what you need. So for example, if you need visual imagery and you see that it's cloudy, even though the instrument was gathering data, you know that it's not going to help you very much. And with that, we will switch back to the demonstration. If I can figure out how to get there again without fanfare. I do want to point out a little bit of an interesting thing here. If you look over on the left and you see the flights listed, you'll notice there's this little icon associated with some of the flights, but it's missing for some of the flights. And this is important relative to getting to the data itself. The icon, or the flights that have icons, mean that there is in fact a flight line associated with that flight, what that means is the GPS system was working and that data has been made available to us. And so you can see, if you click on any of these, you'll see the flight lines turning on at the various areas. For the ones that don't have that icon, this means that we have a flight report, that there was a flight that was taken, but for some reason we do not have instrument data and we do not have GPS data associated with that flight. We wanted to list those flights for completeness so that you know there were additional flights that were taken. It's just we're not sure exactly where they went. But we do make the flight reports available, and you can go study those if you so desire. A lot of these flights are things like transit flights where they weren't really gathering data, and so there wasn't much science that was going on. But some of them are where the instruments had a problem, had a significant problem, or weather was a significant problem. And so we made those available just so that you can, just in the interest of completeness, and they are interesting to read through. All right, so assuming that we've gone through and have selected, or we know an area that we're interested in looking, when it comes time to actually focus on getting the data, let's zoom in on one of these areas. The way you do that, the way you actually get to the instrument data, is by using the tree on the left and clicking them open to get a list of the instruments that are on that particular flight. So we can see for this flight, there was ATM, there was CAMBOT, there was a KU band radar. There were a number of instruments that were flying. And so if you were interested in, let's say, the KU band radar, if you click on that, this goes out to the NSIDC data system and finds the data products associated with that instrument and associated with that flight and highlights them so that you can basically click on it and then go access the directories that those data are in. We offer a service for the smaller data sets that is not available for the KU band radar, and I'll see if I can find an example where this does come up, where we will tar the data, all of the data up for you into one tar file so that you can just do one download to get all of it. But there's a size limit on that, and for the KU band radar, it's just too large. So what you can do is click down through it and get to the actual data associated with that particular instrument. So this is the browse data, and so if you keep clicking on it, you can either save it to a file or you can open it up and look at it. And it's as easy as that. It's finding the flights that you're interested in over the geographic areas and then drilling down into the tree structure to get to the instruments. We'll look at another one. Let's look at ATM, for example. Now you'll notice it's taking a little bit of time to go and gather the information up. This is having to go back to the servers and zero down on exactly what data is there for that particular flight. It takes a little bit of time because a lot of these instruments are generating so much data, it takes a little bit to ferret out exactly which pieces we're interested in. You'll notice for ATM data, there are a number of different data products available. There's level 0 data. If you want to look at the raw data coming off of the instrument, we have that. We have the 1B QFIT elevation data and the level 2 data as well. So any of those you're free to get. Now you'll notice that they also have some other products associated with ATM that are grayed out. In this case, it's the CI's freeboard data. That means that we know the data is available, but we at NSIDC are not currently holding it. But we wanted to note for you that data is there, and you can get with the instrument providers, the data providers, to get to that. Yeah, so for the level 2 ATM data, you'll notice that we do have this link here where the data is small enough that we can give it to you in a tar file all in one time instead of having to go down here and select each of these files individually. You can see it would be kind of tedious to have to sort down through here and pick out these individual files. And so being able to tar it up into one thing should speed things up for you quite a bit. All right, well, having said that, we'll go back to look at a couple of other features, but the gist of what I have shown you is the basic mechanisms that you use to search for and find the data through the portal. There are a few other features that are available out here that may be useful to you in terms of trying to decide what's the most important thing to look at. One of the things that we're adding in is the use of overlays that you'll see listed over here on the right-hand side. So this is basically the data that's out there now that represents the geographic features are basically coming from what's called the blue marble data set. But we have some mosaics and data structures that are out there that may provide more insight to you for particular geographic features. For example, the mosaic of Greenland, you see gives you quite a bit more feature information, or the shaded relief DEM map, or even the measures velocity map. The velocity map is especially interesting to people that are looking at glaciers. What this shows is the relative speed of how the ice is moving in an area. And so if you're looking for very dynamic places to look for IceBridge data, this shows you where the most changes were taking place within Greenland. Or if we go to the southern hemisphere, it shows you where the glaciers are and where the most movement of the ice is taking place. And so that helps users quite a bit with where they want to focus. Another thing that we've been working on is adding in a measurement tool. I'm not sure this would be particularly interesting to most of the people on this call, but we're beginning to add this for the science team to begin planning out their missions and where they want to do their flights. But it's a fairly straightforward way just to look at what the distances of a given route are. And so we're beginning to add more capabilities relative to that, but right now it just does basic measurement. Some other things that are available, there's a help capability that will bring up quite a bit of information relative to how to use the system. There's a quick start guide and then a more detailed user's guide. There's also contact information to let us know if you're having trouble or if you have any questions. We also have a feedback capability here that we would very much appreciate any feedback that you can give us on this. The last thing that I wanted to show is I've thrown a lot of acronyms relative to the instruments and that sort of thing, but over here on the upper left-hand side, we do have the Operation IceBridge data summaries and all of the guide documentation associated with each of those instruments. So we talked about ATM, that's the Airborne Topographic Mapper. And so you can go into the ATM, down to the levels set, and look at the metadata records, the documentation, and those sorts of things. So this would help you, if you are a researcher, decide which of the data sets were most germane to the area that you are looking at. Obviously, some of the instruments are more useful for some things than others. For example, where's the top of the ice versus where's the bedrock underneath. Different instruments are useful for different areas of that. With that, I think we're, other than asking again to provide as much feedback as you can, that's pretty much it. I would ask, one thing that I would say in addition to that, especially in terms of feedback, these layers, these overlays that we're making available, this is an extensible list, and we are looking for suggestions from the user community about what overlays would be the most useful to you. So please provide feedback on that if you have any suggestions. And with that, I'm going to turn it back over to Jennifer.
Okay, thank you, Steve. So I have provided this slide here with contact information for our speaker, assuming that loads properly here. Okay, and this information is also contained in the question and A file sharing pod. So if you don't have an opportunity to note this, not to worry, this information is something you can download when we have finished. Okay, so we're now going to move to the final polling questions, and take a couple of minutes to fill those out. And after that, be sure to stay on the line for the question and answer period. After that, we will move to the question and answer period. Thank you. Okay, I'll give the polls just another minute or so, and then we'll move on to the question and answers. Okay, everybody, we're going to go ahead and move along now to the question and answer period. And you see here in the lower right-hand corner, we do have the presentation that's been uploaded, the agenda, as well as the speaker contact information. So you may feel free to download those files at any time. I'll leave it's actually something that you can still download the files from this file share after viewing, when you're viewing the recording at a later date. However, these files will also be posted along with the recording from today at the tinyurl.com Earthdata webinar. And I noticed in one of the polls, someone had mentioned that they may be interested in Giovanni DAC or PODAC altimetry data. And I just wanted to say that we do actually have a Giovanni data access demo. I understand they're releasing a new version soon, but that was, we do have a recording, I believe, from June that was given on the Giovanni data access tool. The Physical Oceanography Data Center actually provided a GRIST sea surface temperature product suite and applications and tools demonstration as our first webinars that were held back at the end of May. Those are also found there as well. Okay, so why don't I go ahead and see whether or not we've got any questions here. All right. I don't see any questions yet.
Well, this is Steve. I will say, relative to that, we are talking about, just as I mentioned, the overlays and some of the base layers, we are talking about ways to overlay other data and information visually, like Giovanni would be a good, and some of the other Motus products would be a good example of being able to do that. And then what we would do is probably provide click-through access to the DAC that's actually holding the information.
Okay, does anybody have any questions? If you have a question, go ahead and, why don't I go ahead and unmute everybody, and since we've got, a relatively small group here.
The conference is now in talk mode.
Anybody have any questions?
Hey, Steve, this is Helen at GHRC.
Hey, Helen, how are you?
Good, how are you?
Very well. Are a little damp right now, but
I liked your pictures at the beginning. So you may remember when you were here, we had, we're working on kind of a similar data viewer thing. And I was wondering, what's the underlying software you guys built the portal on?
Actually, we're going through and trying to decide if the way we're going is the way to go. But it's basically just open layers.
Okay. That was our guess.
And we're trying to decide, and based upon the experience that you guys had and others, we're looking at do we want to stay with that, or do we want to go with something a little bit more that's got a little bit more oomph to it. And while we're doing that, somebody had mentioned in one of the comments I saw, there's a lot of clicking involved. We realize that too, so we're trying to go through and see what we can do to clean the interface up, and in so doing, looking at some of the underlying tools that we're using too.
Okay, good, thank you. We'll be interested in keeping up with what you guys are doing as we, try to make our field campaign data better accessible too. So I also thought your mission reports are very pretty. Is there some web form that your guys are using to file those? Or do you know
I'm not sure I understand your question, Helen. So what we have is we have a text file and we have a PDF file that NASA gives us that's associated with each of those flight reports.
So somebody else is collecting the flight reports and handing them off to you?
That is correct. Now, initially, I will say when the mission first started, we had generated a small portal for ingesting that data from the flight guys and from the mission scientists, but NASA, as part of their flight operations, was requiring them to enter pretty much most of the same information, and so they were getting irritated about having to do it twice. And so we basically combined forces, and the NASA flight report mechanism has been extended to include a couple of the questions that we had associated with that.
Okay, so that's probably the Airborne Sciences crew?
Yes, yeah.
Okay, good. That's good to know too.
And they've been pretty cooperative. They have extended that to specifically ask some of the things that we needed that they didn't need, but they were still willing to put that into the generation process.
And then they provide them to you as PDFs?
And text files, but yes.
Okay, okay.
Yeah, and I will say I can't encourage you guys enough to go look at those. Some of those reports are really fascinating to read through.
Okay, thank you, Helen. Thank you, Steve. Any other questions?
Yeah, this is Jeff Walter. Hi, Steve.
Hey, Jeff. How are you doing?
Good. How you doing? Once we get to our ultimate goal of having all this data available in Echo and full metadata, have you guys thought about how that would impact your feature set or capabilities of the portal, and what kind of things would you be able to do differently or better, or just more once you?
Yeah, in fact, what Jeff is referring to is we're in the process of changing the way we're doing the data ingest. When IceBridge first started, we were trying to move data so quickly that we we use kind of a brute force method for getting the data out there and available, and so the metadata set is not as rich as it might be, and it's not as rich as it is for satellite missions. And so we're going through now and doing an expansion of the metadata that's gathered. And Jeff, in answer to that, yes, we are trying to think about how we can best utilize that. And at the same time, it means that we're probably going to have almost a two-tier service level for a while, because we're going to have the new data with a much richer set of metadata associated with it, with ECS and ECHO and those sorts of things behind it. And we'll still have the old data that came in through the fast track process. And so we want to have new features that exploit the new metadata, but at the same time, we need to make it clear to the users which data products are not yet in that format.
Have you thought much about what those features would be?
Primarily subsetting is the main thing that we're getting excited about being able to provide, and
right.
That is something that users have asked for repeatedly, and it's very difficult to do with the current fast track approach, and we're hoping with the new ECS MetGen Echo approach we'll be able to do that better.
Okay, great, thanks. And yeah, I mean, just with the limited metadata you have, I mean, it is, you know, it's what you guys have been able to do with the limited information. It's great. So.
Okay, thank you for that question, Jeff. Steve, thank you. Are there any further questions for Steve?
I will, while the silence is there, I will say, in reference to what Jeff was asking about, we are soliciting user feedback in terms of what are the main features. Again, subsetting has been a big deal. Being able to do the TAR on the fly so that you can get the data all in one swoop has been a big deal. And also access to other non-IceBridge data that are related but not directly part of the IceBridge project. Those are the three main things that we're hearing from the users, but we are soliciting feedback from all of you, so please let us know if there's things that you'd like to see out there.
Hey, Steve, this is Michael Goodman. I haven't been out on the portal, so I don't know really what the database is per se, but your user community right now that is using it, is it tend to be the more technical side, or do you have people come in who want to get the data after it's already been fully processed and all the products are there in a very easy to use format? Can you comment just on general what your user base is and what they're expecting right now?
Yeah, I can, Michael. That's a good question, and it speaks to the features that we want to make available. Right now, the data user base is very technical. Again, you saw all the acronyms we were throwing around. I didn't go into any detail about we talked about instruments, but not why those instruments are good for different things. And so so our user base is very technical, but I think it's in part because you have to already know what you're looking for to effectively use the portal, and we need to change that. We have had inquiries from a lot of educators and a lot of educational institutions on how this data might be useful for even the undergraduate and in a couple of cases even at the high school level. And right now, the portal is too techy to really fully support that. So for example, with the filtering, you can filter by instrument. Well, if you don't know what those instruments are, that doesn't really help you a lot. And so one of the things we want to do is to allow you to filter by the type of data. Is this sea ice data? Is this surface elevation data? Those sorts of things. So it's more accessible by the non-technical side of the house.
And Michael,
and follow up to that, because it is, and I understand airborne data, having been on several aircraft and airborne programs myself, does any of the data lend itself, or is it processed so it can show time series of data? So if you're looking at the retreat of a glacier, is it at that level 3 or level 4 level data that you can look and see changes in time?
Right now, not so much, but there are some access proposals and there are a number of efforts afoot to produce exactly that. But right now, there's precious little of that out there, and you have to kind of piece it together yourself. One of the sets of users that we have been told repeatedly by ESDIS and others is that we need to have better support for the modeling community, and that's going to require some of what you're talking about. And so the data providers have been working on trying to provide some level 4 products and some level 3 products, but there's not very much out there at this point.
Yeah, and Michael, just to follow up on that, this is also something that came up at the Science Working Group meeting, not just relative to the portal, but to the data itself, that if you're, this is coming from other scientists who weren't on the team. They're saying if you don't already know kind of what you're looking for and you don't have an intimate understanding of the instruments, some of the data sets are a little tough to use. So I think they were looking for better kind of use, metadata and more user-friendly formats and that kind of stuff. So it's a sort of a known thing, but there's work going on in those areas to address those concerns.
Thanks, Jeff.
Yes, I guess we acknowledge the question and can only say that we are working towards finding some solutions to it, but we don't have any in hand at this point.
Right, and it's not all on NSIDC. I mean, a lot of this is in the data provider's plate too. So.
Yeah, yes, it is mostly on their plate, I think, in terms of marshaling the data for other uses. And do keep in mind, the data is just now kind of coming in, and so these products will come. The mission hasn't been out there, but just a very few years now.
Okay, thank you, Steve. Any further questions? If there are no further questions, then we will conclude this webinar, and I do thank all of you for standing by as we experienced the technical glitch for a couple of minutes in the beginning. Thanks for joining us. The room will be open for the next 10 or 15 minutes.
Hey,
thank you, everybody.
Yeah, thanks, everybody, for joining in.
All right. Great job, Steve.
Bye-bye, Steve.
Thank you.
Thank you, Jennifer.
Bye.
Bye.